Hola, me llamo Meredith. Soy doctora de medicina de emergencia. Tengo dos hijas. They are 3 and 5 years old. My husband and I are both physicians, and I'm originally from Indiana. We moved to Tennessee about 6 years ago to be outdoors. We like the mountains and the nature things that we can do in this area. So I originally actually wanted to be a dancer. I grew up doing ballet my whole life, and I went to college as a dance major, and I broke my foot in my first year, and so I needed to find a new path. And that kind of seems like a strange switch from dance to medicine, but in my heart I always knew that I wanted to do something to help people, and I was good at science, so I started on a biology studies that just eventually led me to wanting to do medicine and thinking that I would actually be a doctor for dancers and work in New York City, and things just changed, and it turned out that really my passion was in emergency medicine, and so I did my training in that. So the emergency department is a very busy place. We do see a lot of sick people. The hardest part of my job isn't the medicine, but it's when I have to give people bad news. If I have to tell them that I think they may have cancer, or that their family member has died and we couldn't save them. Those are the hardest days. And remembering when you get bogged down with all the work and everything that's happening, that people are scared, and keeping your humanity in medicine and not just becoming a robot and going through the process, but trying to feel what people are feeling and make sure you would take care of them like you would your own family. So as I mentioned before, I just kind of have the heart to want to help people, and lucky enough to have my husband feel the same way. And so we wanted to find things that we could do outside of the United States. And actually his mother had gone down to Guatemala and done an immersion, live with a family to learn Spanish. And so we had that link of someone who had already done something similar. So that was kind of my introduction to Spanish and how we started in Guatemala. And then opportunities just presented themselves. My dad is a dentist, and he was traveling to Honduras with a mission trip and asked me if I wanted to go. And so he worked as a dentist, and I was a medical student at the time. So I did minimal things, mostly just assisting. And then a few years later, during my training, our hospital had a program set up going to the Dominican every year, mostly to provide surgeries, which again wasn't my training, but I was able to assist in those situations. And while we have translators, it's always helpful to be able to try to relate and speak some Spanish while you're there. So I'm a member of Concord United Methodist Church, and with a lot of the recent things going on politically, things have been weighing on my heart. Separating of families at the border, and children being kept in cages, and I needed to find a way to feel like I was being helpful. So in church one day, I filled out a prayer card and asked God to help me figure out how I could be useful in that capacity. And 2 lovely women from the church reached out to me, and they already had a group formed. I'll forget what it's called, but it has to do with immigration and just being helpful in that scenario. So they were already doing this thing called Witnessing Wednesday, where they go to the ICE office a different group goes every Wednesday of the month, but we go one particular week, and they thought that I should join and I should come with them and see what it was all about. So I've just been a few times, just started, but for me, and I think the group as a whole, the goal is just to let them know that not everybody in the United States dislikes them or hates them and wants them to be gone, but that a lot of us still see the value in having different people in the United States, that we can all bring something to the table, and that everyone is welcome as much as they can be. And so we just want to share that God has told us that we should love our neighbor no matter what. And so as hard as that can be sometimes, that's what we try to do. So on some of my experiences there, I've been fortunate enough to sit down with the children. I enjoy that the most, just making them smile and have some happiness in their day. I imagine that they live with a lot of fear and confusion. And although I can't fix their personal situation, if I can make them smile, then I think that that's at least something. So sometimes I feel overwhelmed by the amount of things that I think need to be fixed and changed. And so I can get bogged down by all of these things that bother me. I worry about, we talked about children at the border and immigration issues. I also worry about human trafficking. And it's easy to see how big the problem is and wonder how you can personally have an effect. And I know that education is a big part of affecting change. So one of the things that I've started to try to do is to reach out to organizations who are already doing things to, for instance, combat trafficking. And I've tried to arrange lectures and education for my fellow physicians so that other people can understand the needs that are out there and how they can get involved and help. I would like to do future mission work. My husband and I both have plans for that. I have 2 young children at the moment, and life is a little bit chaotic and unpredictable. So for right now, I'm just starting out and trying to help where I can. But I see in the future being able to dedicate more time. Right now, work is something that I do basically to have money to do other things. It's really not the most important thing to me. I want to reach out more and be more helpful in my community and other communities around the world. So for women, I think that we spend a lot of our time not focusing on ourselves, but worrying about everyone else around us and taking care of everyone else, your children, your spouse, your extended family. So I don't think women place importance on necessarily going to the doctor, doing the preventative work, getting exercise, eating right, which leads to things like high blood pressure and diabetes. So I think women need to realize their own internal value and that they do have to take care of themselves in order to take care of other people as well, and that they have the right to go to the doctor, they have the right to seek help when they need it, and not just try to do everything themselves. Also, childbirth, lots of women, and particularly women of color, are at higher risk of dying in childbirth, dying from heart attacks because they don't present the same way as other people. So really just not being afraid to have a voice for yourself and to ask for help when you need it. And if you're not getting it, to not be afraid to be more aggressive in seeking that help. So I feel like we live in a time now where things are very divided, and there's a lot of anger and bitterness coming from all sides. And so one of the reasons I got started in the work with Witnessing Wednesday and my church was to try to find a way to show love instead of anger. And so my goal is to show other people that they can do that as well, that we don't just have to fight and shout and argue, but that somehow we have to find connections so that we can come together to effect change. I think all sides can agree that there are problems with our healthcare system and maybe with our immigration policies, but fighting isn't gonna make things work. We have to find a way to come together to be able to find real solutions. It's hard as one person to see how that you might affect that change. I was never really politically involved until a few years ago, and so I'm starting to realize more the power of my vote and the power of my voice, and that just by having conversations with people of different views, that you might affect their change, their thought process, and their vote, and just maybe how they see things in the world. So currently I work as an emergency physician, and I mentioned that I work part-time, and that is so that I can have time to spend time with my family, but also to volunteer and be involved with my church and my community. I'm really not sure where I see myself in 10 years. My husband and I have talked about the possibility of moving somewhere in Latin America or somewhere else where we would strictly be volunteers. I have fears about how that would affect my children and our safety, but we also want to find a way to show them how much we have and how much we have to give, and that working for others is important. So our future is up in the air at the moment, but I think we'll keep plugging away with what we're doing now, and hopefully the right time and the right event will present itself, and we'll know. Being a female physician is certainly easier now than it used to be. 50% of people who graduate from medical schools in the United States now are women. It's very important that we still provide support to each other and community. I think women, regardless of their profession and their education, as a generalization, we tend to be more submissive and less confident. And I have noticed that in myself when I speak to male specialists, that I may take a more subservient stance than I would normally. And so realizing that we're not inferior, and that we have the knowledge that everyone else does and the same training, and just using your voice and being willing to speak up and be confident in your ideas and how things need to go for a patient in particular if there is a disagreement on treatment or therapy, that you stand your ground. But also, as women, one of the benefits we have in being physicians is that we do show more empathy and more emotion, and to also not be afraid to express that with your patients and share in their joy and their pain, and to act as a human being and when we're treating people and their families. So the world that I see is scary. Not just in a way that it's, I always see danger for my children, and I think part of that is a product of what I do for a living. That I know what it looks like when a child is injured, or someone is in pain. But it's also just scary because I'm afraid of the projection that we're on, for so many reasons. As I mentioned, I worry about trafficking and climate change, and I feel the burden of all of these things that I don't know if I can change. But I want it. I want what I see to be more hopeful. I want to see a world where people can work together and be happy, and where my kids have a future. A woman with vision is someone who sees a need either in her family or her community or the world, and tries to sit down and figure out a way that she can help. Maybe not to necessarily fix the problem, but how you can be a part of the solution. And again, it may be something as small as your own bubble, your own family, or seeing a greater need and trying to draw other people into that to make the world a better place. As I mentioned, there's just a lot of bitterness and anger and hatred in the world right now, and somehow we have to find a way to come together. And I think that women are especially good at doing that, showing love instead of showing anger. I wish I had more time for hobbies, but I have gotten into refurbishing some furniture. I do chalk painting on some dressers and tables and chairs and things. And I also, in medical school, I learned to knit with a women's group. And so we used to sit around and knit scarves and hats for donation. I sew a little bit. And I mentioned I used to be a dance major, so I love to dance. And at some point, I would like to get back into that more, hopefully when my children are older.